Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Heritage and Cultural Society of Africa Foundation, HACSA's 2021 live webinar series under the theme, Bridging the Gap. Thank you for joining us. My name is Yvonne Bochwe, and I'm the representative for the Ghana branch of the HACSA Foundation. We chose the theme of Bridging the Gap so that we could explore, discuss, and highlight the various ways in which we are eliminating the linguistic, cultural, social, geographic, or trade-related barriers that keep the African diaspora apart. For our fourth webinar for 2021, we are so excited to speak with a multi-talented and visionary artist, Dr. Serge Attukwei Clottey. Artists are traditionally powerful storytellers, and Dr. Clottey's work not only bridges the gap between cultures, but it also shares the Ghanaian experience. Our conversation with Dr. Clottey will touch upon his Accra beginnings and lead into his current work. Welcome, Dr. Attukwei, and thank you so much for joining us today. Audience, he's joining us live from Los Angeles, and we are grateful that he took the time to be with us today. Welcome, Dr. Attukwei.
Pleasure to be part of this conversation, and I'm quite excited because I've done a few interviews, and I think this is like the most interesting one, which I have to like be live and talk to people, and I think it's quite interesting, and I'm looking forward to how it turns out. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Attukwei. We are so excited. So let's start with our first question. You were born and raised in Ghana. What would you describe as your cultural identity? And how does this cultural identity inform your work?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Ghana, and especially originally from Jamestown, and my family migrated from Jamestown to Labadi, which is quite historical because in between the same city there was a migration, and I think that I kind of define what is my identity. Either I'm from Labadi or I'm from Jamestown, but because I was raised and born in Labadi, it's kind of tied to my interest as an artist. And, so I kind of focus on like migration as very keen in my practice because of the historical background of where I come from and how that tied into global migration, So I've been interested in the family history of how they migrate and how they settle. And, that has really been very, very much of my interest as an artist, how to tie the family history of migration into my narrative. So I think my upbringing, it's more based on like in Labadi, because I'm very familiar with Labadi compared to Jamestown, where I originally come from. But now I kind of like revisit back, in Jamestown to see how that history of our settlements began and how that could lead into wider conversation around my art expressions, So I think Ghana is very central part of my work, Africa, if I may say, but so I don't see myself living elsewhere because then I lose the content, I lose so much that my work informs, yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Just to follow up, just for those who may not know the difference between Jamestown and Labadi, could you explain a little bit about what that difference is and why that migration was important for you?
Yeah, Jamestown is like the next two towns after Jamestown is like next two towns into Labadi. And I think that originally my family was from Jamestown, and they migrated because they were trading with the people of Labadi, and which is about 200 years ago. They were trading alcohol and beef. So what my family does, they go to the northern region to buy the cow, and they transport it to Jamestown and they slaughter, and then they travel on the boats from Jamestown to Labadi. So in between that routine, they fish and for food, and that is how they got settled in Labadi. And what happened was that the reason why they settled in Labadi because they helped Labadi fought against the people of Teshin over the Kweshi Lagoon, So that was the benefit of the settlement, because and it was a verbal agreement, so the chief of that time gave my family a vast land to settle. And, so that is how my family settled. But over time, the people of Labadi realized that we are not actually from there, so we don't have any chieftaincy role. Our space are being invaded by the people of Labadi. And even till now, we are going to court to defend that space, so I think migration becomes the merit over time. And that is the challenges that my family is facing. So as an artist, I'm interested in, archiving those history, because it wasn't documented. There wasn't paperwork. It was a verbal agreement. But to be able to collect that history, I have to speak to the older people in the family. And that is how I'm able to formulate this whole history through performance and, and to build up my narrative as an artist, So I started this project called the Yellow Brick Road, which is an ideal project to kind of investigate and demarcate the property which was inherited by that time. So that could be used as archival materials, or could be used as a paperwork to defend the case in court. It's because now, even till now, my family goes to court and they don't have a proof. It was based on verbal, agreement and all that. And so that is something that I think that has been very important to my engagement with the history of my family, because then the elders kind of are well informed as to supporting my project, because at every 6 months of progress, we install the work and to demarcate the property, which started in 2015, and hopefully it's supposed to be done last year, but due to the pandemic, I couldn't, finish the work. So I'm looking to extend that project into 5 more years to be able to archive that history, and that could be used for archival material to, inform the upcoming generation what has happened in the past, and that is how they'll be able to, to defend the situation. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Attukwei. I think we know the many benefits of art, but this is a new way that I'm hearing about art being used as evidentiary for evidentiary purposes,
Right.
in terms of properly law. So it really shows us the power and the extension of what art can do.
Absolutely.
Now, focusing a little bit more on the reception of your art, you have shown your work all over the globe. Can you share some stories of how your work has been received in the African diaspora? Do you notice any difference between different subgroups of the African diaspora in terms of how they connect to your art? And a related question, can art bridge the gap between Africans on the continent and peoples of African origin in the diaspora? So it's kind of a 3-in-1.
Yeah, so let me just wrap all together. I think that, for me, I began art as a personal interest. I was working for myself. I never thought about anybody, because I think that I create to challenge my own imaginations. And so my work was known abroad even before Ghana, because I come from a painting background. And for me, the galleries back then were interested in traditional paintings and all that, which I did. But I studied art in Brazil in 2006. And so when I came back to Brazil, I decided to approach art very differently, to be more experimental, to pick subjects like environment, gender, religion, and all. I began to be more conscious about subjects. And so, yeah, that totally changed. And, so I was getting a lot of interviews abroad. I got featured because of what my work is about. It's about environment, and environmental issues is global, so I got a lot of response from the West. And, I was traveling for residencies in Europe most from the beginning. So people thought I actually live abroad, but I was based in Labadi. And, because I think global, but act local, because the source of materials are locally based. And, and I think that it's very relatable to the people, so, but I look at the global response as to what environmental means to the world, so and I think most of my travel in Europe back during the 2014, 2015, I focused on engaging the diaspora as part of, because I think that most of them are not well informed as to what is happening in Africa. So my work was to bridge, to identify, to remind them of this is Africa now. Africa is not Africa in the past, so this is how contemporary Africans artists are approaching, situations, are using materials to address issues of what is happening in Africa. So what I did was, most of the time I engaged diaspora as a collaborative members in my residencies. That is how I'm able to, to understand their struggle, what they stand for, and what they are interested in. So through photography, through poetry, through performance, and all that, I engage them, and it helps me to expand my conversation around the globe. Not just me coming from Ghana doesn't mean that I'm from Ghana, but what I create is global. I don't want to identify as my piece as an African art, because most of my materials were imported from the West, like paint and all these things are not from Africa, so I don't want to be categorized as my work as an African art. I come from Africa. Yes, I want to be categorized like African artist, but what I create is global, so I engage them in a way that could, and I remind them of what is Africa now, because most of them, they've never been to Africa. What they hear about Africa is on the media, and which is sometimes might lead them into distraction of what Africa is, So yeah, I come in as a messenger. I see myself as a messenger and bringing messages from the continent, to for them to appreciate, the country and what they have and what they need to realize, So for me, the diaspora has been very involved in my practice, if I may say. Most of my shows, I try to engage them in a performative way, by incorporating, their stories as the diaspora into my narrative, So I think art is a very powerful tool that bridge, Africa and its diaspora across the globe, because Afro-Galonism is a made-up word, and that is basically, how African migrant is identified with its background. For instance, there's Afro-German, there's Afro-American, there's Afro-Japanese, and all, so the idea of the Afro-Galonism, because originally the cooking containers were not from Africa from the beginning. Now that like Africa is producing, neighboring African countries are producing the oil, but originally they were coming from the West. And then, we use them because oil is a need, we use them for food. And then we use them in our like household needs, like storing water. Some use them as chairs, some, even put them together and sleep on them, So I'm interested in how do I navigate the same object back to the West by changing the form and value of it, which will benefit Africa from that transaction, because the West engage in transaction, and that is how they benefit from Africa. So I'm interested, how do I navigate the same object back to the West by changing form and value of it? So that is Afro-Gallant, because originally it's not from Africa, but once it become part of us. The gallon is very symbolic in our life, especially with the women, So I made I made up the word Afro, which is, a name attached to African migrants, to Afro-Galonism, because it's original. Now we've claimed that, but through my process and manipulating of that object, I think that it's well appreciated in the West than just lying discarded, causing environmental hazards in the continent, So that is basically the idea of Afro-Galonism, to be able to migrate the same or navigate the same object by changing form and value, where Africa benefits from that transaction, So I think that my work, I'm happy that, because some of my paintings, kind of like uplift the diaspora, because, sometimes they struggle to identify them of these geographical locations. And, so I create images that will uplift them, that, okay, although we are Africans, we have like a bad history, in the past, but this is Africa now, we are using art and fashion to uplift the African spirit. And that is what I incorporate in my work. And by, because I think I think that the West has influenced us in so many ways, especially Europeans settling on African coast has influenced our food, our even names itself. You go to Jamestown, you have people with British names, like, German, Dutch names and all that. So I think that this is the point where we need to steal from the West, especially our culture has been stolen. There are cultural migrations where other people like the West are celebrating our festivals, even in the West, like food migration, and there's environmental migration where people leave because there's like a disaster, there's like farming, there's no water, so I think migration is very key in my work, and I find ways to touch base on like every basic aspect of migration. So yeah, I think my work is to uplift, like Black people on the continent, that we have like a very terrible history in the past, but this is the time that we have to embrace what we have now and try to uplift ourselves and, collaborate in so many ways where I think people will realize that, this is Africa now. That is my interest as an artist. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think it is really important that a lot of your work, you're looking at the connection and really communicating with Africans in the diaspora and really being able to, as you said, to uplift Black people in the continent. So let's segue from your connection between your art with those in the African diaspora to the connection that your art has with global audiences. Now, we note that it's still rare for artists from Africa to reach the dizzying heights that you have achieved. What was your breakthrough moment? And in your opinion, what about your art resonates with global audiences?
I think as I began saying that, I'm interested in like my art celebrating my space, especially with my community. And then through social media engagement, I got to meet collectors, and I found my art dealer on social media because he saw a piece of an image of my work, and then which was a performance. It's not actually a physical object. It was a performance of me dressed in with a mask. I used the Ganon as a mask to represent the marks of our time. The water warrior. So that image actually got his attention. He reached out, and that was the, I think for me, was the breakthrough, because then I began to have galleries in New York. I have gallery in Germany. I have gallery in LA, in London. But for me, I was interested in celebrating art with my community, because I think that it creates sort of like a huge community development. It's engaged community. It becomes like mostly sort of like art hub. I use my space as an art hub to engage children, like every single individual, because galleries back in Ghana was meant for rich people to purchase art, and it's not accessible for like, individuals. It's, so I think that my work kind of engage people on a very equal level, where you get access to see the work, you can touch it, you can enjoy, you can celebrate, like that was my interest. But because of like me sharing like all this information on social media platforms, a lot of art collectors, institutions fell in love, because it's not just a commercial, it's to engage people, to make people understand, it tied communities together, so. And some of like the commissions that I find it very privileged is I got a commission by Facebook in 2018, where I had to do like a giant, like 4 stories piece with the work. And what I was interested in, how the process of the work engaged the community, because the piece is actually going to Facebook, which is like a big space, and then and also Facebook serves as a community that brings people together. So that also tied to my practice, where I engage people as part of the process. So the entire community was part of the process, and the work was installed on the screen like cars were driving, because I want people to understand that the origin of the work is what makes the work to stand out. So I document that process, and I share with them, because they are interested in how my work has expanded into community based. And so the work was then sent, shipped to Facebook. I had to go there, and it was such an experience, because Facebook is beyond just the interface that we see on our phones, on our computers. It's an empire, and me being there was a privilege. And what I did was to be able, because the work was shown before in Labadi, before it was sent. So I asked my people in the community, my studio assistant, to just take pen and write markers, write their names, whatever, proverbs, whatever they feel, because that is the only way they can feel the belonging, because the work is going there, it's not coming back. And look at the distance of the work is sent. So those, when people go to Facebook and take photos of you can see like the Ghana names, the Ghana language, because I'm a Ghana and I'm interested in how do I engage my history or my tribe into, which would tie up to my practice. So you see a lot of Ghana text in my work. And then, so I think Facebook, I think was a big deal for me, and it has really expanded like the global audience. And for instance, and I had a show too in Norway, which is quite intriguing, and which I had to travel with one of my studio assistants for this, for the first time traveler, you can imagine. So the work actually has encouraged the community, and that helps with the production, because now I have like people, like older people sourcing materials, they helping, kids helping with the process and all that, so I think the work I would say, though it has like global audience, but I'm interested in like the community engagement in my, so I don't separate my community from my work. They are very central part of my practice. And yeah, and a few other exhibition like the Coachella exhibition was very challenging, because I was invited last year February to the Coachella Valley to pick a location, and for me, because I work in the community, I'm not used to like the huge space. I'm not I'm not, I've never experienced, because most like Labadi is a suburb of Accra, and it's a very small village, so it was easier for me to engage, to install, and, but this is the point where it's a desert, and desert to Africans represents migration, it represents fear, it represents struggle, it represents death, whereby in the West, it's kind of like, it's very adventurous, like people go on vacations, so for me, it was very challenging to be able to mentally settle as to where I want to install my work, then, so there are a few places that I find interested, especially like hearing, like I've heard so much about the Joshua Tree, and where at this point I was there at the Joshua Tree, and I want my work to be, like to be next to the Joshua Tree. So yeah, I picked that spot. But when I came back to Ghana, there was a whole controversy around, the Desert X exhibition, and, because of the pandemic, so in between I was creating my work, I was getting like a lot of emails, like, my location has been changed, so it's somehow challenged, because I have the vision of like where I want to install my work, and now they have to like relocate. And there was an article by one of the media that some, the Coachella Valley local authorities didn't agree with my proposal. They rejected my proposal because my work is about water, and it's actually what is happening there in Coachella, Palm Springs, so they think my work would exploit, and I think that is what I'm interested in, how the work could spark up conversation around what is happening. And then so they said my work should be installed in a breach worthy environment, which I find it very, very disappointing, because I want to spark up conversation around water and water scarcity, and the importance of local authorities, to step up with that, so I was quite disappointed in a way. And then, like I had to discuss with my team, and this is what happened, and that somehow affected the work, because then I begin to lose interest, because where I expected the work to be installed has changed, and now I have to like figure out a whole idea as to where the work, so it was back and forth challenges, and then finally we found a place in Palm Springs where the local people, like the Black community, kind of like requested for the work, because they think that, oh, the artists come from Africa, and then it would be very important to have the work installed in their space, which I think was for me very, very, very interesting. And, because I'm interested in how do I engage my work as part of like uplifting the Black community. And yeah, so before I wasn't, the exhibition was open before I arrived, and I didn't want to travel because I was scared, with this pandemic, and, we've been hearing a lot of like death and, stories in LA. And so I didn't want to travel, but my dealer said, this is a big deal for me to be there, because the community is looking forward to me. And so what I did was to be able, because the work was sent there, I was getting a lot of like images, like people were taking photos and tagging me on social media. So I got like, no, I need to do something. I need to do a mirrored version of that in Labadi, because the people kind of like, oh, so I built, instead of like 2 cubes, I built like 4 cubes, which is the scale is very relatable to a room size, because Labadi is a suburb, and there are a lot of like, not overpopulated, but a lot of like property conflict, and all that. So an ideal temporal room to build is like 7 feet square, which I kind of relate that to the keep. So people see the keep, oh, this is the size of a room, so it became very interactive, and, it functioned very differently in the space, whereby in Coachella, it's about 9 feet keep. And yeah, so I did the mirrored version, and then, I invited people to experience and, to celebrate the work within the community, as people are celebrating the work outside the community, So then I had to make the trip. And when I first arrived in Palm Springs, I was so blown away by the work and how the work is facing the mountains. And, I was blown away because I wasn't sure how that, because of the change of location, I was struggling to mentally accept that, okay, this will work in other space. So when I saw the work, and I decided to do a performance to kind of activate that I'm here, like I'm present, and so I did a performance, and the performance actually is called Here to Stay, because although we have like different geographical locations, we share a common problem, which is the water scarcity, so I represent, the performance represents the trek between these two cubes, and the cubes represent Labadi, my community, and the Palm Spring. There are two different locations, but they share the same common problem, which is the water. So as a messenger, I'm interested in how do I activate the performance by using myself as a struggler who is trying to trek for water between these two cubes, So yeah, the performance for me, I think more in performance because I grew up with performance, because most of our traditional rites are being performed, So that is how I function as an artist. And so the performance was good. I brought some fabric from Ghana. I brought 2 gallons from Ghana, which was quite interesting because when I was traveling, people were wondering why I'm traveling with the gallons, So at the airport, I had to explain, okay, this is something that I use as an artist. And, so somehow materials kind of change form in different places, because in Ghana, it's just discarded material. We use them to store water and nothing else, whereby I have them in my suitcase traveling on a plane. And people thought I was crazy because they expected me to travel with something more valuable, and they have no idea. So it was quite fun when people approach you in different perception, and also I kind of engage them briefly about what I do, and then they begin to okay, then I have to do research, and then we got to understand. So I think for me, Coachella installation is one of the major for me, because I now begin to realize how functionable those materials that I use can go beyond just carrying water, So the futuristic project that I'm working on is to be able to build affordable rooms for people. It's going to be an installation, but also it's something that I have to document and see how the human self is tied to that object, because it's very symbolic in our life, and we need that to survive. So I'm trying to break away from getting rid of them as water storage containers to be more functional. If I can build a house with this, because plastic have quite a long lifespan, and it survive all the weather conditions. So it's something that is going to be something to help, in a way, to help the community feel more of the importance of my project and my artist practice. It's not just for me, but to also create a very important role in the community development, So yeah, so I think there are a few important, and there are also another commissions coming up that I'm quite excited about. But all the same, I feel, for me, sometimes I feel I'm not an artist. Sometimes I don't feel normal, because there's so many ideas, and it's based on engaging people. It's based on traveling, So now I don't see myself as just Ghanaian artist. I see myself as an artist in the world. I could be like any other artist in the world. So I think that traveling has been very, very important to me, because I learn different cultures, I engage people, and I begin to realize that, okay, I have a position in the art world that I need to focus on, and yeah.
All right, thank you, Dr. Attukwei. We're just at about the halfway mark. So for those of you that are just joining us, we are fortunate to be speaking with Dr. Serge Attukwei Clottey, the founder of 360 Projects Ghana and the creator of Afro-Galanism. Now, Dr. Attukwei, we've spoken a little bit about Desert X Coachella, but we want to get a little bit more information. So just to highlight for the audience, and just to really hone in on why this is particularly important is because you are the first Ghanaian artist to showcase your work at Desert X Coachella. We do have a video that we'd like to share with the audience, and if we could cue that video now.
The gallon represents the soul of surviving the water scarcity. They represent humans, they represent people, because every individual has a gallon. Water is a major issue that we deal with every single day in our life. I'm looking at the consumption aspect of the jerry cans. It's not an ideal containers to store water in them. It's not hygienic, it's not safe. So what else do we use them when they are broken? I think it's important to be able to see artwork in different orientation. I'm interested in engaging community as part of my practice. Bringing people together, it's a way of collaborating where non-artists became art-oriented. 4 or 5 people or more working on one piece. It's a very traditional way of making fabric. The piece that I'm making for Desert X is an extension of an ongoing project, which is the Yellow Brick Road. We all in this world have a common problem. Ghana, where I'm from, Labadi, Accra, and Palm Spring, which is Coachella.
What I find really powerful about Serge's work is that the conversation translates across geographies. Is very exciting to this piece. There are major water problems here, especially when you look at communities in the East Valley.
The cubes represent survival, and the texture gives you a sense of how long this object has survived the weather conditions. The yellow for me, it represents the world. It represents richness.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So Dr. Attukwei, let's give our viewers, especially those who may not know about this influential event, can you please explain what the Desert X Coachella event is all about, particularly its significance? I know you've highlighted that it was one of your breakthrough moments in terms of your career, but if we could speak a little bit more as well about what it means for African art in general and you in particular. So let's start with, I guess, a general explanation of Desert X Coachella.
Okay, so Desert X is a biennale that is being held every year or two. I think every 2 years, and in Palm Spring. And they invite like international artists to just do installation to intervene the space, because it's a desert and it's a vast land, and so it's something that artists has to like get away from their comfort zone, to explore a wider space. And I think for me, when I got the invitation, I had to like research the previous ones, and I realized that this is actually a big deal. This is for me the most challenging exhibition that I've ever dealt with. So I think my work is global, because it's water, and water is a human right. And so I kind of, since I've been interested in water, I think that the subject fits in the desert perfectly. And, but it's a back and forth conversation as to what I actually want to do, because I proposed a couple of ideas, and, and then they find the subject of the water most important to fit in the festival, and which I did. And so I would say I'm proud of myself to be able to push into this kind of like art world, because coming from Africa, there's always like a limitation, and I've pushed so hard that my work is recognized globally, and my subject is like a global subject that is affecting the entire world. So I'm much impressed with the result of the outcome of my work, and how that has translated into like a wider conversation around art in public space, and the Black community appreciating the work, because whilst I was there, not just the art, but I engaged the kids, community kids, to create a mask. The mask should represent who they are and what they stand for. So we had a whole workshop with the children, and they were so happy with that. And they asked questions, where I come from, the history of my background, and I find it very, very intriguing, because most of the time I do presentation with like older audience, but where I have to work with children, which I always do back home. But in that space, I find it very interesting how the kids are very curious as to the materials, where it comes from, what we use them for. So, engaging them has really, broadened their horizon as to what is happening in Africa and what Africa means. So the Max workshop was something that, they appreciate it so much, because I asked them to express what they feel, what they stand for, through creating the paper marks. And I gave every child like a piece of my work, the plastic, to keep, because I told them this is part of me. So once they are part of me, I will always remember them. And so it was very uplifting, if I may say. So the exhibition is still on till next month, and we are hoping to, because the Black community actually proposed that the work should be there permanently, which I find it very, very interesting, because then they want to feel the belonging, because I come from Africa and I'm a Black artist. They want to connect. Because most of the time where the working store, like, people usually don't go there, but whereby they have over 500,000 people visiting the place, which was, for them, was a very big deal, because then they get to interact with the people. The space is well appreciated now, and you have visitors back and forth and all that. So we are still working on that proposal to be able to keep the work permanently, so that every now and then when I come to the US, I might visit and do a workshop with the children, collaborate and do something beautiful. And then so the work and for now, like, I've been there like the second time, and I went there for the first time, and now, like, the grass is actually coming out of the plastic, which I think it's very, very intriguing, because that's the point where arts and science collide. And for me, it's very also it stands for the title, the wishing well, because plastic has really affected agriculture back in Ghana, especially the farming, like the fishing, and whereby the plants, the grass is actually coming from the work, gives you, hope that in things are going to be fine. So I love how the nature kind of play with the form or the plastic in a way. Yeah.
No, it's wonderful. It's like the second evolution of your art as it's, interacting with nature. It's quite wonderful.
Absolutely.
I'd like to go back to, you touched upon it earlier, your concept of Afro-Gallenism, and noting that it's, how you can see African migrants identify with their African origin. If you could tell us a little bit more about, how did you come up with this concept?
So I've been working with the Gallons for nearly 18 years. I started like very, very young, because I grew up with that. And when I was a kid, I was had to carry water on my head, and what me for, I didn't like it, but growing up in Ghana, that's what you have to do, especially in the suburb area. You have to carry water long kilometers and all that. So I grew up with that, and growing up, I wasn't comfortable. Anytime I see gallon, I panic, because it represents water scarcity, and then you have to carry on your head, So I was actually living with my mom's family. So I left my mom's family to stay with my uncle, who has a fountain, so then I don't have to carry water. I don't have to fetch water. I will be there like to collect the money when people come to collect fresh water, So for me, I felt very comfortable then. But then also, when people come to collect and their gallons are broken, they just dump it in our house. They just leave it there, like they don't know what to do with them, So I was growing up, there was so much in the house that I thought, okay, I could do something with them, and usually when I was staying with my uncle, we use them as chairs. We sit on them. When you have visitors, we offer them gallons to sit on. So it's very part of, our household. Then storage became a problem, because we don't know where to discard them, because tons of them, and it's actually invading our space. So I started like working with them, putting them together like a wall, and paint on them, So I paint portraits like the past president. Like I painted, first one I did was Kwame Nkrumah. I constructed like a portrait of Kwame Nkrumah on the gallons because I was trying to criticize how he built the Akosombo Dam, which serves as water resource for the country. And now people are not they're not, preserving that. And, we are having this water scarcity, so the work became very political after looking at like the research background of the objects and what we use them in our current times. So the idea was to move the portrait around the city and put them together. So it became more like a performance puzzle, Then also I consumed so much that storage became a problem because I was staying with my uncle. I wasn't staying by myself. I didn't have my own space. So the idea was cutting was to reduce the volume, and still regulate the consumption, So I started cutting and I started creating collages from them because I come from a painting background. I tried to create a canvas base with the plastic. And I begin to realize that every gallon has a story because it's tied to someone's life, and people, interesting how people demarcate their gallons with expression of color, they write their names and all that, because gallon from the Volta region is quite different from gallon from Accra because of the names. And, people express colors like the Volta region. Most of the gallons that come from Volta are like red because, it's very, I don't know, but it's very cliche. And it's a stereotype that the always, love black, red and all that, So I began to look into that language and I realized that there are a lot of language identity based on where it comes from. So I began to tie this, language together to create a huge piece. And you can tell that, okay, this is coming from the North. This is North language. This is the Hausa, this is the dance and the trees. And, so it became sort of interesting language identity, Then further, I began to look at the research background of that object, where it come from, where does it go after it's being used, So that cycle kind of expand my practice and looking at the research background and how do I change this and now, So, and I also refer that to the triangle trade where Europeans were trading with Africa, exchanging goods and humans and all that. So how do I also exchange these objects that is originally coming from the West? How do I navigate the same object back to the West, which Africa will benefit more from that transaction? So the concept is basically how African migrant Afro is attached to African migrant, So I attach the Afro because now I feel like these objects, we own that plastic gallon, we own the gallon, it represents who we are as an African because it's used to survive water. And I'm trying to change that perception that this is what we need to survive the water scarcity, So cutting was to get rid of them in the system, destroying. But what happened was when I started cutting them, there was a conflict in my community because again, myself against the women because they think that they need that to survive the water scarcity. So why am I destroying them? So it was very bad that I need to engage them, invite them to the studio to take them through the process and how the inside look like when you store water. So based on the engagement and education about how it gets contaminated, water gets contaminated over time, they begin to realize, and then they start sourcing the material. They start getting rid of them and bringing them to the studio. Or sometimes I just have to trade the new ones and collect the old ones. So the work somehow touch based on environmental, and that is affecting our health based on how we use them. Because once you store water in them over 3-4 days, it gets contaminated because of the weather, the heat, and the oil and all that. So somehow I had to engage the community more on an educational background to get them as part of the work or as a collaborators, So now my work has expanded into more of a community-based project or movement, and I think it's quite important. And then so my first piece that I did it took me 1.5 years by myself. I had no money. I was using the handsaw. I was using nails. I have several injuries. And so when I did, and I was working full time, I didn't want to do any 9-to-5 job because that's not how I function. That's not what I think. For me, I create to challenge my own imagination. And then that has taken further to work. So I have passion with what I do because I create for myself, so then it's more committed. It's more of my daily routine and all that. So I think that I think social media, I would say, was a breakthrough for me because I was pushing my work on social media, sharing my process, and I got so much like interviews, and people even wonder why I'm thinking like that as an artist, because my work is beyond just creating art as a commercial, but also making art very much of an impact, not just creating art for commercial, so I got a lot of environmental agencies reaching out, inviting me to do a talk and all that, so yeah, my work was received abroad before even Ghana, because most of the galleries were interested in like very commercial artwork, that they can sell for people, for tourists and all that. But I tried to break away because that's not how I function. I want to, because, growing up in Ghana, when you get access to all those electronic gadgets, our parents used to say, oh, this was built by like a 12-year-old kid or a 10-year-old kid, and it's very depressing, because maybe you are like 18 years and they are telling you this phone was built by a 10-year-old white kid, So for me, I was always trying to challenge that stereotype, So I wanted to build something global, something that can function across the world. That was my childhood interest. And then, so I was building all these electronic gadgets like lights. I was building sound by myself, because of like the environment and the society I grew up with. I was always challenging creative ideas to people that are, okay, I'm Black, I'm from Africa, but I think global. I'm challenging the global space, So yeah, so I think childhood has really enlightened me now about, so most of the work are like inspired by my childhood. Now I sit down and think about, what I was doing when I was 5, when I was 8, when I was 10, when I was 15, and that add up to what I am today, So I don't see myself living elsewhere except Ghana, Labadi, Accra. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think in our discussion, Dr. Attukwei, you've noted on several occasions, I think it's fair to say you'd characterize yourself as a messenger, with your work being really rooted in community.
Sure.
But having that extend from your community to the global stage. Now, we know from a general sort of layman's perspective, your art has been well received, but let's talk a little bit about sort of traditional art circles. We know that the art world is notorious for leaning towards a certain racial, cultural stereotype and demographic. Now, given that, you're focused on really being a messenger, sharing your story, your Labadi story, which resonates globally, do you see any positive change in terms of inclusivity and diversity in traditional art circles?
Yeah, I think there has been like drastic change. Like the art community in Ghana, it's building up. A lot of like young emerging artists are being recognized globally, and also like in terms of like like the contemporary, my co-contemporary artists are exploring more of histories of migration, materialism, like religion, gender, and all that. Like compared to like the older generations, there's a little bit of like misunderstanding. I wouldn't say, but they think that their time was different. Like their generation was very different. They are telling stories of which are completely different. Like the traditional art. They are. And mostly they paint for the money. They are more commercial. But this is what the contemporary are expanding narrative around history of migration, using materialism as a reference, like performance and all that. And I think that though there are so many challenges, but like once you have the vision, you don't want to be caught or you don't want to be dragged into that. What I stand for is what I stand for. It doesn't matter where I am, where I show. Now, my choice of subjects still manifest wherever. It doesn't matter the space, because I make decisions as to what I want to show. Sometimes during the beginning, you have like people tell you, okay, when you go to residencies, these are some of the themes you have to work with, But now I choose themes that I want to work with, and that is what I want to do, So that also gives you sort of a power, to be able to stand for what you say. And so, but the racial challenges, it will never stop. But what you stand for is what you stand for. I don't want to be caught by those racial politics, And so for me, I work global. I have a gallery Berlin, like I'm from Ghana, but I have a gallery in Berlin, which has different audience. I have a gallery in LA, different audience. So I see my work, though I come from Africa, but I see my work on more of a global platform, so I don't want to be recognized. My work should be recognized as African art. What is African art with me? If I don't create stuff from Africa, like my source of materials come from the West, it's global, so I don't want to be categorized as my work as an African art, and also those are some of the challenges because there are exhibitions that is an African art fair. It's fun, it's important, but sometimes the categorization is very depressing, like African art fair. What is African art fair? Yeah. So some of the things that we have to deal with, based on, what is there's a supreme power in the arts that, make decisions. But yes, so we are pushing as much as we can to be able to stand for what we want, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we're going to focus a little bit on your current work now. And I know that you're currently exhibiting in Los Angeles. I think you've alluded to it in your discussion earlier. We do have a slideshow of some of your work at your current exhibition. If we could play that slideshow now. Thank you. Some really, really beautiful pieces. I really liked the Chadwick Boseman and also the final one, Think Like a White Man. Can you tell us a little bit more about this current exhibition and about any upcoming new projects that you have? Sorry, Dr. Attukwei, it appears that you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry. This current exhibition is Beyond Skin, Beyond Skin. And this work was produced during the pandemic, where I got back from the States and everything changed as soon as I got back in February. And then, my work is based on the community. And, since there has been restrictions and all that, like social distance, I was just in my studio and, like rethinking, because I come from a painting background, most of my paintings, I work on them by myself. Like it's very emotional. So I have to lock myself in my studio and then, think around, meditate and to be able to execute. And so the duct tape, I use the duct tape, and duct tape is a material that I've used in the past for a performance, because I do a lot of performance. I improvise space and, connect with energies. And, so I've used the duct tape in the past as a performance symbol. And, and the history of that is that, like I was in Austria for a residency, I think 2013, and I saw a sculpture piece. Like I was wondering what it meant, because it's not like a figurative, it's just like a cube sort of. And then so I asked what it meant, and I was told that it was a statue, a monument of a Nigerian migrant who was being deported back home, and they had duct tape tied around his mouth, his hands, and he passed on the flight. He died on the flight. So I felt because I used that tape in my performance, I felt I have to like immediately change, that symbol of violence, to use them as symbol of strength, so I started using the duct tape as a painting, material. So, and also the source of images are like, I was scrolling, most of my time I spent on Instagram, my social media, like looking at, you know, because during the time of the pandemic last year, creative are not, you know, are not being able to work, and especially people who work with numbers, you know, and you know they were like posting pictures of the previous work, and you know, so I spend most of the time looking at especially like the Black images, like in fashion, in art, and what they are doing. So I begin to screenshot like those images, and you know, there are images that I find very intriguing, I find it very inspiring, although I don't know the people, but I can see like the expression on their face and in what they stand for, and you know, like the costuming, the background, and also looking at referring that into like the mid-century photography. You know, like there are like few African photographers that has inspired me a lot, like Seydou Keita and James Vano from Ghana, and few other photographers, and how they incorporate black and white and their source of subjects, you know, because during that time they kind of like dress like the colonial masters, you know, and I think that is the strong influence of European settling on African soil, you know. So I'm looking at that and, you know, reimagine, you know, contemporary photography with photography where you have the background, the backdrop, people taking pictures with their belongings and all. It's quite interesting. So most of the work was based on social media presence, you know, because I was very worried because I couldn't engage the community in my other studio space, you know. So this is just by myself, and you know, so I created this body of work during the pandemic, and I think that it was very challenging because, you know, I was working from, you know, from home, and throughout the pandemic I wasn't going anywhere, and it was tough, but also it gives me better understanding as to what an artist stands for and what are your responsibilities. How do you keep going even when there's no inspiration or motivation, you know? So I think that looking at, and also I want to present Black bodies, you know, just not just the body, beyond the skin, you know, because we have something beautiful, like in terms of like fashion and how we play roles in our, like the fashion industry, you know, Black bodies are used as a puppet and all that, you know. So I think that the work kind of focus on that, and also presenting, like I said, uplifting the black race as a very strong, you know, in a very strong presence, you know. So yeah, so for me, I'm happy that I was able to work within the time, and that has, you know, to have the work shown in Los Angeles during the time of the Coachella. So I felt like I was dealing with like two different space at the same time, two different subject, completely different subject, but also tied up to the same idea of migration and how like cultures are being migrated to other spaces and all that, you know. So, and I think for me, the diaspora somehow stands for that, because, you know, although they are far away from home, they kind of incorporate the fashion sense of African fabric and, you know, into their daily, you know, clothes. And I think that I can't somehow question myself, what is African print? What is African print? Because the prints are not coming from Africa. They are being stolen by the West and reappropriate into there, and they send them back to us. I mean, for instance, like most of the fabrics in Ghana are printed from the West, like Blisco, Orlandis, and those things. They are not like African, you know, but you know, they somehow still the motif, you know, designs, and reappropriate them and send them back to us. So when you talk about African clothes, what do you mean by African clothes? You know, so those kind of like ideas that play around, you know, the process of the work. And, you know, I'm happy that, and I use corkboard, and, you know, corkboard is a material that it's used in our, like, socially in Ghana as like notice board, you know, put notes on them and all that. And yeah, and I also see them as the human skin, because they are brown and they are like shades, and, you know, so there are certain symbolic things that informs the work as to beyond skin, you know, looking beyond the skin, you know, like we are Black people, we have a beautiful sense of fashion, you know, we have a beautiful sense of belonging, you know. So that is an ideal idea for the exhibition this time in LA.
Thank you, Dr. Attukwei. We have quite a few people online who are actually in Los Angeles. And for those who might be visiting the Los Angeles area soon, please visit Dr. Attukwei's exhibition at, I think it's the Shimchowitz gallery, we have provided information in the chat so that you can also see the images and also be able to interact with them in person. So we do encourage all of those who are in the Los Angeles area, please do visit the Simchowitz Gallery to see Dr. Attukwei's Beyond Skin installations. So we're near the end of our engagement with our final question, Dr. Attukwei. Thank you so much for your time. I know we're nearing the end of your availability with us. Our final question is, do you have any advice for our Sankofa members or anyone in the audience who is considering art as a career?
I think that for me, I think consistency is the key. Art is beyond just the money. It's something that has to be impact. So I myself, I do art from the beginning. I do art because I want to make a statement. I do art because I want to challenge the way I think. So art is very accessible. Art should be accessible. Art should be human rights. And so I believe that it's quite a journey. It doesn't come like a day. It's quite a journey, and you have to believe in yourself. You have to see yourself just like an artist in the world, not just African or Ghanaian artists. You have to be global. You have to look at what is happening elsewhere. You have to learn. You have to research. You have to admit. And yeah. So I think art is it's a very powerful tool, just like politics. And I believe that once you know what you stand for and you keep being consistent, everything is possible.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Attukwei. Thank you so much. I know we're at the hour, over the hour, but if we could have a few minutes dedicated to some questions from our audience. If there are any questions, we just have a few moments, so just maybe a few. Please, if you do have a question, just use the raise hand icon to indicate that you have a question to ask. Alternatively, you may type your question in the chat box and I can read it aloud. So I'm just checking to see if there are any, if you do have a question, please, because unfortunately we don't have a lot of time with Dr. Attukwei right now. Oh, great. I see we have a question from Geneva Opong. Geneva, if you could unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, yourself?
Good, good. I am a big fan of your work, so thank you so much for taking this time to speak with us. It really means a lot. I've always been really inspired by the materials you use in your work, and it was really interesting to find out today that you actually also use paint a lot, or originally started working with paint. So can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what inspired perhaps the transition between working heavily with paint and then some of the more community-based materials you used? And do you feel like you changed the materials you use based on the audience, or is it more just by what inspires the story you're trying to tell with a specific piece? So just really interested in like kind of your thought process in choosing materials.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I come from a painting background, so I'm a painter, but the work involved over time based on like traveling, and I begin to explore materialism, because I think materials are very symbolic in our life, and it has stories of people, So I think during this challenging times of the pandemic, I went back to my painting studio to be able to create something, because I come from a painting background, and I always see what I do installation through the painting, So source of materials is based on like how the material is tied to our life. For instance, the garland is very symbolic. We need that to survive, So, and also the new drawings, I'm also exploring materials such as deductive, and so I'm interested in like exploring different other materials, but based on what I'm interested in, particularly, I choose the materials that I want, because I want to have like a brief history of the materials and how it plays roles in our daily life, and how symbolic it is in our life, So I've dealt with a couple of materials, but the most important that I think the garland is something that is tied to our life. I don't know how long it's going to be, but I believe that if Africa or Ghana has water, what are those garlands be used for? So it's very futuristic, and sometimes I get questions as to how long are you going to work with the gallon for? Once we still consume, it's something, it's non-stop, because we are still consuming these gallons, and it's causing a lot of environmental hazards, So my source of material is based on the research background and the history that is tied around the objects.
Thank you for that. That's really inspiring.
Thank you.
All right. So I think, Dr. Attukwei, if you'd like to conclude with your final comments for our viewers.
Yeah, I think it's been like a very amazing month, and I'm quite inspired to expand my practice further to more global platforms, and such interviews like this, it's very engaging, because most of the time I had to respond via email, text, and but I am more comfortable when I speak, because then you can tell where I'm coming from. You can tell how excited and so I think I'm very happy to be part of this, and I believe that I've gained wider audience through your platforms, and people can check out the work and engage. I'm open to questions, and I'm open to other collaborations in the future. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Attukwei. We are
Pleasure.
grateful for your time, for sharing your story, for viewing your beautiful creations, and really for being the messenger of the Labadi community to the global stage.
Thank you
so much for that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Remember, for those who are in the Los Angeles area or will be visiting, to please visit the Simchowitz Gallery to see the Beyond Skin exhibition from Dr. Attukwei. Again, the link is in the chat box, as well as the links to join the Sankofa Network and to donate to HACSA. So thank you to everyone for joining us what is our Saturday afternoon in Ghana, and I think various times across the world for everyone else. Thank you again, everyone, and thank you for your support to HACSA. Bye, everyone.